said it after I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
There's a lot of this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
Last week, we introduced the accountability gap, a gender disparity in the degree to which people are held accountable for the impact of their choices on themselves and on others. In many ways, gynocentric society labels men keep the baby. And there's more. It has even been argued under the guise of reproductive rights that women with jobs and incomes do not have access to birth control if their employers are not government forced to pay for insurance that covers, without copay, elective treatments like hormonal drugs, intrauterine devices, and abortifacients. When men's advocates use the term to describe nothing more than men's right to equivalent decisions regarding their fertility and parental responsibility, women's advocates vehemently object. They have treated the topic like a zero-sum game in which any ability men have to control their reproduction takes away from women's control over theirs. In the past, this resulted in Betty Friedan leading a no-male pill protest when the idea of one was being explored. Even today, feminist media writes about male birth control as an attack on women's reproductive control. Some argue that conception should be entirely a woman's decision, even if the man does not want to conceive. Others act as if the use of medical birth control by men would mean women couldn't use theirs anymore, with articles asking whether women can trust men to use hormonal birth control. Why would they have to, when women have access to multiple forms of birth control of their own? The reality is that argument by women's advocates is projection that reveals their interest in retaining for women the ability to conceive without the consent or knowledge of the father. This is further indicated when women's advocates claim that giving men the option of paternal surrender, a legal equivalent to safe haven abandonment, which would absolve a soon-to-be or new father of any child support obligation by permanently terminating his parental rights, would force women to abort or take away their right to retain custody following birth. They defend the broken punitive child support system, which forces parental responsibility on men as a necessity to protect women's so-called right to choose to be mothers, even if they cannot fund that choice themselves. They treat women's single status as evidence of abandonment by a father they deem irresponsible when the mother has control over consent, the risk of conception, carrying to term, and retaining custody. With all of the options women have, this is the direct argument that it is a man's responsibility to fund women's lifestyle choice to become single custodial mothers. In other words, women's advocates are basically defending entrapment pregnancy as a woman's right. Therefore, they can honestly be said to use the term reproductive rights to slap the label rights only for women on not just the right to choose to prevent unplanned reproduction, but also the choice to reproduce with a partner who does not want to reproduce, the choice to walk away from parental responsibility regardless of whether they have reproduced or not, and the ability to do it all on someone else's dollar. Meanwhile, should the father wish to take full parental responsibility and raise his child in his home, he gets a totally different story about custody rights. Should he seek even equally shared custody through the court system, whether post-divorce or as an unwed father, he is at a severe disadvantage, courtesy of legal standards that are in place due to feminist agitation. Not only is he in for a hard fight to get any recognition of his parental rights at all, if he does get equal or primary custody, he will not get the same consideration under child support standards that a woman would. He is presumed responsible for her support. She is not presumed equally responsible for his. A man can make less money than the mother of his child and be assessed a child support obligation. A man can even be assigned primary custody and still be legally obligated to pay child support under some circumstances. Before maternal custody became standard in nations whose legal systems were informed by English common law, the default in divorce was paternal custody. The father was expected to provide for his children and to see to their care without any of the considerations feminists demand for women today. No support payments from the ex-wife, no government-assisted child care, nor financial assistance from a government source, just his own income minus whatever support he was required to give his ex-wife. The flip side of that situation was that men had the legal capacity to alienate their children from their mothers in the same way that many custodial mothers do today. When Carolyn Norton fought to change that in the UK and set a precedent that influenced every country informed by English common law, she likely viewed it from the standpoint of her own terrible experience of parental alienation and did not foresee the pendulum swinging so far in the opposite direction. It did, however, in a big way. Women are now primarily awarded custody, but without the degree of responsibility men faced. Custodial mothers are more often than not entitled to receive child support from non-custodial fathers. In fact, according to an assessment of data from 1995 through 2009 published at dalrock.wordpress.com, mothers receive over 80% of all child support dollars paid in the United States. They've also been assisted with government-funded child care, increased eligibility for welfare programs, initiatives by charitable organizations, and greater flexibility in the workplace. Men have always had to do or obtain for themselves those factors for which women have traditionally received assistance. As a result, there are stark gender-based differences in the circumstances in which single custodial parents raise their children. According to U.S. Census data published in 2011, a higher percentage of single custodial mothers than single custodial fathers become custodial parents as teens, earn low income or are entirely jobless and without enough alternate income to rise above the poverty level, have custody of 4 or more children, and combine joblessness with multiple child custody. On the other hand, a higher percentage of single custodial fathers than single custodial mothers have jobs, earn high income, have enough alternate income to stay above the poverty level without being employed, have custody of only one child, or maintain employment when they do have custody of multiple children. Despite the obvious implications of this information, 85.3% of all custodial single parents are mothers. In 2014, Time.com announced that more millennial mothers are single than married. According to 2016 data from the U.S. Census Bureau, about 4 in 10 children are born to unwed mothers. According to a 2016 survey by the American Sociological Association titled How Couples Meet and Stay Together, 69% of divorce is initiated by women. And of course it is. The stark gender differences and consequences faced when breaking up one's family would both severely limit men's ability to even escape abusive marriages and make it easier for women to give up on a marriage that's merely on the rocks than to work at salvaging it. In fact, there is no accountability for a woman who chooses to break up her marriage regardless of her reasons, as her prospects for custody or property awards in the divorce are also unaffected by most factors, and her ex doesn't even have equally shared parenting rights. Initiatives intended to reform the custody, support, and alimony systems have been effectively prevented by opposition from women's advocates using demonization of men as deadbeats and abusers and accusing them of only wanting time with their children to reduce their obligations to the mother or to torment her. Some articles have made the argument that fathers should not have equal time with their children because time away from their children is painful for mothers. Feminist writers unironically describe this pain without ever considering that fathers experience the same pain or that being separated from their fathers hurts children, as a wealth of research shows, if one's common sense doesn't make that obvious. As a result, numerous times equally shared parenting legislation has failed to pass because of lies and melodrama introduced into the process by feminist organizations. Neither the gender differences in financial solvency nor the wealth of information demonstrating the importance of father involvement in a child's life have affected these outcomes. Mothers are not socially or legally accountable for the impact of these life choices on their children. Fathers, on the other hand, are presumed responsible for not just that impact, but also how their ex-wives feel, should they try to mitigate it through involvement in their children's lives. Or they're held responsible for the circumstances created by their sex partner's choice to become a single custodial mother, all with no recognized right to prevent those circumstances by controlling their own fertility. The contrast between men's advocates' view of the situation as an inequality in reproductive rights and the accompanying responsibilities versus the gynocentric and feminist view of women as victims of their own choices has made it impossible for the two groups in the gender issues discussion to find common ground on issues of divorce, single parenthood, custody, and property division. And in the discussion at large, feminists still have the advantage due to the socially driven accountability gap between the sexes. One individual using the court system to extort another for support following irresponsible lifestyle choices with far-reaching consequences only sounds reasonable to a society in which women are not held to the same accountability standard as men. Ultimately, the people most affected by this particular manifestation of the accountability gap are their children. Is it any wonder that some involved in the greater gender issues discussion have argued that women are, in effect, also children? Hello and welcome to Technical Difficulties Night at Honey Badger Radio, HBR Talk number 16, Reproductive Rights, the Accountability Gap Personified. If you want to join the chat on YouTube, please go to the Badger Live Streams channel. If YouTube is experiencing platform malfunction syndrome and won't let you listen, we're also on Twitch. And I believe the channel there is actually called Honey Badger Radio as well. Tonight, I'm here with the professor of... There goes my intro. Welcome to Technical Difficulties Night at Honey Badger Radio. It just disappeared. I'm here tonight with two really cool people, and I had a great introduction for them. Yay! Fuck Microsoft and fuck PCs. I'm going back to Macintosh.
The technically deficient Reaper.
Like it just closed. Freaking piece of junk. No. So anyway. As I was saying, you guys have no idea. Like right before the show, the computer that I broadcast on decided that it wanted to override all of my settings. And among other things, it decided that I'm not allowed to use an external mic. And since I disabled the internal mic, nobody could hear me. So this was a fun night. So I got it back open again. and I'm here tonight with the professor of perspicacity, Aiden Paladin, and that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, to talk about the birds, the bees, and the bullshit. Assume the position, guys, and hold on tight, because we're going in deep. So who wants to get this train started?
I guess the one thing I wanted to comment on in the intro was good luck, ladies that say that, oh yeah, it should just be a woman's choice. Yeah, good luck, because this is totally a one-sided endeavor. So have fun getting pregnant by yourselves.
Yeah, didn't you know it only takes one to tango? We don't need to. That's not how this works.
It was the knock-up fairy!
Shit.
That's interesting, though. In terms of, I've seen that in my personal life, and I also think we're gonna start seeing that more and more. At least I've seen some articles in pop culture sort of stuff that are these women who are 30, 35, 40, and they go, all of a sudden, oh shit, why can't I find a husband? Well, did you look at the laws that you've been pushing through for the last, for the 60 years, essentially? It's not surprising. Yeah, it's not in men's best interest.
No, not at all.
Now, there's been a very long series of laws passed. The first one, obviously, that really had an impact was the Tender Years doctrine going through, which is what in the United States, and I believe, well, it's basically what was created by Carolyn Norton, and her situation was that, she and her husband were, if I remember right, they were separated, not divorced, and that's part of the reason why he had the degree of power he had. Because there wasn't no-fault divorce, so there had to be fault for a divorce, and if somebody was at fault, then that person basically, was shafted in terms of custody and property anyway. And she had to deal with not being allowed to see her children at all. and to the degree that her son got sick and died, and she didn't get to be there for him when he was sick. So I mean, there are people, there are assholes come in all flavors, right?
Absolutely.
And there are people on both
Definitely.
sides of this. The thing is, it isn't any more right for women to be able to do it to men than it is
Oh,
for men to
no.
be able to do it to women. Nobody should be able to do that to another parent.
Well, no, and if feminists were indeed seeking the so-called equality they often say they are, they would have noticed that the pendulum was swinging too far in the other way and said, "Whoa, guys, we need to chill out with this stuff." But surprise, surprise, there was silence.
Well, it's almost like they're seeking out power rather than equality.
Oh,
Heard that.
almost.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And actually, it's kind of, there's a super chat that just came through that's very relevant to that. Joey Jojo says, gave us $5, and he says, 3 ways I see to solve this. Reverse women's sexual liberation, best way. 2, sex bots, easiest way and most realistic. And 3, men become celibate, the hard way. Although I don't think any of those would be by itself effective, because I don't think women's sexual liberation is reversible at this point. And I don't know so much that everybody's going to be able to switch to sex bots, or everybody's going to be able to become celibate. But feminists and other women's advocates have noticed the MGTOW phenomenon. And I hesitate to call it a movement, because those guys can't really agree on anything. And
They're all very disparate. They
right.
have all
I mean,
different reasons.
It's a movement of individual, or a phenomenon of individualism. You can't have quite a unified movement in a situation like that, with the variety of political outlooks and backgrounds that people are going to have. But it's definitely been noticed, and they're scrambling. It scares the shit out of them. Because, this is a resource to them. Men are a resource to them. Marriage is a resource to them. Childbearing is a resource to them. Otherwise, they would not have set up the child support system the way it was.
Look at how they're freaking out about the sex bot stuff.
Oh,
it's
God.
so
Oh my God.
because it look, if you were really a strong, independent woman who don't need no man, why would you be so terrified of the concept of artificial wombs and sex bots? Could it be the fact that you understand on some level that you control men through sexuality? And particularly at this point, given our laws, as we just heard about in detail, that you control men's ability to have any influence over their children and progeny.
Yeah. Well, even if this woman supposedly doesn't want no man, she wants the notion that she can go out and get any man anytime she wants. And if all the men are busy with sex bots that aren't a bunch of giant complaining assholes all the time, then she won't have a chance. And then all of a sudden she'll have to either develop a real personality or find some other way to actually interest people, and by then it might be too late, or she'll just have to realize that she's going to get nothing but cats for the rest of her life, and tough weenies for her, I guess, or lack thereof.
Yeah, this is a situation that it looks like it's going to be a combination of the 3 things that Joey Jojo described there, and some other behaviors that are going to have to happen, some other actions that are going to have to be taken, because not all men are going to be satisfied with celibacy, or going their own way, or sex bots, or any of that. Just like not all women would be able to be satisfied with the lifestyle choices that radical feminists make.
Well, you know what?
And it's one of those things where if men want to be able to have partners, they're going to have to demand more accountability from women. And there are women who will stand up and meet that standard. There are women who will bitch about it. There are women who will fight tooth and nail. There are women who will work harder to avoid accountability than they will to live up to it. But there are women who will do what it takes to be an adult so that they can have a partner. And
Yeah. Sorry. You can go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Well, that's basically it.
I think part of the issue is though, and then of course, you go, sorry, but that's always funny when that happens. It's like, oh, I've got to think. Part of the issue is that I think this destroys the whole idea of the female ego, truly of self-esteem, because how awful must you feel about yourself to get all of your validation out of this kind of thing? I don't think it's as good for women. I mean, it's not good for anyone in the system. It's easier. Easy doesn't mean good though. And it doesn't, and I mean good on a psychological level, a physiological level, a societal level. This is truly detrimental to every aspect of society. It includes men and women. Women are not made stronger. Women are not made better through this. Here, you can literally do whatever you want. Isn't it? How ironic that you have reduced yourselves down to the power of the pussy, right? As a function of feminism.
Yeah, that's pretty sad.
I don't really understand. And I don't even see how it's actually easier, if I'm being honest, because to me, when I see these people freaking out over every little thing that men do, it just makes me feel terrible for the men. And I don't know if that's just because maybe I have more men in my life that I care about than those guys, and they just can't empathize with men. But I don't know. I feel like it should be the more normal thing to be like, hey, those men deserve empathy too. How about you calm your tits and start realizing that it's not all like a zero-sum game between men and women, right? We don't have to take away all of men's rights in order for women to be safe and happy. In fact, doing that too much is definitely going to lead to you not being happy, because a lot of women depend on men in their lives. And that was what I was actually going to say, because based on what Hannah was saying, enough men will get tired of this. And if too many women are sitting quietly and letting these crazy third wave feminists speak for them, and they're not standing up and speaking out against it, then more and more people are just going to think, oh, this is the norm. This is acceptable in society. This is how all women are, even though I think that it's still a majority of women that aren't. But, if more women don't stand up and speak out against it, then it's not going to be worth the risk anyway. And then eventually more women are going to wind up being alone as more men decide this is a losing game. This isn't worth the risk, so we're not going to bother. So
yeah, that's another thing where men are going to have accountability standards before they will accept a woman as a partner. Women are going to have to push other women to meet those same accountability standards. Part of the reason that needs to happen, I mean, as important as it is to return the world to a status where to a state where men have more respect than they do now, and partnership is feasible again. It's also a matter of lack of accountability among women is an incredibly societally destructive factor. And one of the manifestations of that is the fact, this is a generational thing too, that kids raised in a welfare dependent single mother household are like twice as likely, or 50% more likely to not twice as likely, but 50% more likely to become single parents, both sexes, to become single parents, to end up on welfare themselves, to end up in trouble with the law, to end up addicted to something, or to end up with other forms of dysfunction. They end up with a significant amount more life-destroying dysfunction in their actions, their behaviors, their patterns, because they were raised in that environment. Which means that with every generation of single welfare-dependent custodial moms by choice, and we're seeing more and more of this, we're going to get a next generation that's a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And this is something that the only way to reverse something like this is to bring back the accountability standards that women lived under when women's restrictions in everything that we were able to do were existed basically to facilitate men's obligations. Now, We don't need to go back to a system of restrictions and obligations wherein men were responsible for women. What we need is for that accountability to take a turn to women being as accountable for themselves as men are for themselves. Instead of having men be accountable for women, basically female society in general needs to grow up.
Oh,
Well, I think, yeah, we're kind of held as children, though. Even women hold each other as children in ways in society. You know what I mean? Yeah, we've all experienced this.
Yes.
So there's that female society is sort of perpetually stuck in this at most high school status of very gossipy, very we can't really be honest about anybody else. And I think at one point that might have made sense when we had a different society. But it's basically that women have gotten these new powers in society, but generally speaking, as we interact with each other, we have not grown up to rise to the that same level of responsibility we've been handed. So I don't know what to do. I really don't either. I don't have a good option. I mean, what are we supposed to do? How do we keep other women accountable? If you say something, you're a sexist, you're so terrible, you're blaming the victim, that kind of stuff. I don't, other than what you guys are doing and what I think all of us are trying to do. I don't know what else is an option.
Well, among other things, we do have to fight for that free speech standard as well. That the free speech standard that we've been defending is key to being able to hold people accountable. You can't hold people accountable if you can't criticize them.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, like the whole childlike thing, it's true. And you've got so many examples of this now, like women get drunk. Oh, you know, you're not responsible for your actions, even though if she got behind the wheel of a vehicle, she'd be held pretty responsible for her actions. But anything else, oh no, it's everybody else who's responsible. You just don't worry your pretty little head about it. Or if she gets in a marriage that she doesn't like and she decides she wants to end it, it's like, oh, don't worry, we'll force your ex to keep subsidizing your lifestyle. And you know, that's one thing where I'm like, I'm okay if people really, really want to end a marriage they're unhappy in, but you don't get to keep the same standard of living. You don't get to keep the alimony. You don't get to keep living the same life that you were living beforehand. That's just trying to get your cake and eat it too.
Exactly.
And the funny thing is that so many of them will try and justify it as, oh, like, oh, it's for the children if they have children. But it's like, if you want to justify like a certain amount of child support, as long as it can be definitively proven it's being spent on the child, then maybe. But the alimony thing, I think we can all agree that's not being spent on the children. So don't you dare try and justify that and still claim that you're being a responsible human in comparison to your ex-husband.
Well, there's solid evidence that the child support system does not exist to provide for children. And the reason I say that is, it might have back in the day when it was common for women to not have to work. And so you would have women who would end up in divorce situations and get custody of their children, and they'd be clueless how to support them. And to me, that was where giving custody to women was, as a default, was a mistake. And that needs to be remedied. But the child support system was basically a Band-Aid that was slapped on that mistake. And it existed prior to that in another form. The Old English Poor Laws had something like this, where if you had a family member, any family member, that ended up in a workhouse and was being supported by the state, you basically could be tapped to pay their bills. And if a woman had a child out of wedlock and the father didn't marry her, and she knew who the father was, and she was expected to know who the father was, the state could go after him for child support. So, I mean, those things existed prior, but today, it's very evident that child support is not there for the children. Because anytime there's a poverty situation where supposedly the mother is in absolute desperation, the state gives her welfare, but then takes child support from the father and whatever amount the father gets and keeps it.
And they don't even need to prove that they're spending it on the child. Like, they don't even have to have receipts or anything like that.
And then at the same time, if you have a situation where the mother makes more money than the father, and they have shared parenting, she doesn't owe him child support.
Exactly.
So unless he has full custody, and there's an unusual situation, women pay less percentage of their income in child support, and it is assigned to them less frequently. So if it was really about the children and not about providing for women, it would be standardized. The state would never keep it, and it would not, like, it wouldn't be something that anybody could get out of just because of their gender.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we shouldn't have the situation where we're paying child support anyway. It should be default 50-50 shared parenting, because that's what studies have shown to be the best for the children.
Well, yeah, outside of, obviously, there will always be instances where that's not good.
That's true. That's true.
So
of course.
outside of that, but yes, we know this, and it's what I find bizarre. Yeah. Shared parent, it's better for children. If it was about children, we would not have this proclivity and how to search women.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say, with in terms of shared parenting, there should have to be a hearing before before the state takes away, and it should have to be. It shouldn't be a hidden hearing like Child Protective Services does. They shouldn't be able to silence criticism of the states doing that. But you should have to have something along the lines of the beyond a reasonable doubt standard for somebody's parenting before you can sever their parent-child relationship, because first of all, it is extremely damaging to the child to have a parent taken away, and unless that parent is overtly abusive and damaging, you're doing damage. And the second thing is, the parents have rights. It's secondary to the children's right to have that parent there, but it is harmful to parents to rip their children away from them. It's hard to be away from your kids. So that standard needs to be set, and it needs to be, that's the other reason why I would say actually that child support, if it was for the children, there would be an equal standard in terms of custody. Because it's clearly demonstrated by a wealth of research that involved fathers greatly benefit their children, and in a variety of ways. And I'm sure that if we did research on involved mothers, you'd have the same thing. You can't take one parent away and have the best outcome for the child. Unless, again, there's something really wrong with the parent. And that, just like any other type of dysfunction, is the more rare thing. I'm going to read some super chats. We have Hugolin. I'm going to butcher your last name here. Delarive, I hope. It gave us $5 Canadian and said, have you heard about Bill 151 in Quebec? It's dangerously similar to Title IX. And for everybody in foreign countries to the United States that don't know what Title IX is or haven't heard all of our news about Title IX, the original function of Title IX was just to say that universities couldn't use quotas and other policy to discriminate based on gender in terms of who could take what classes, basically access to their academic services. And it got twisted.
Oof, has it been bloated?
Yeah. It got twisted into this burgeoning protect the women's bill. It started with sports, and they started attacking Olympic sports. There's a lot of men's Olympic sports that have been removed from universities. Gymnastics and wrestling have been targeted out the wazoo. And then in the last few years, they added a bunch of stuff regarding sexual misconduct to it that turned it into essentially a false accuser promotion and protection bill, protection law. So if that's what Bill's 151 and I said it wrong, Quebec. I know the Canadians are gonna jump down my throat for that one. But if that's what Bill 151 in Quebec is, I hope you guys get it defeated, because it has caused a huge amount of damage here in the United States.
Psst, nobody cares about Quebec.
Well, C-16 went through, didn't it? So this is not looking good.
Yeah.
So they're probably fucked, honestly, and I'm so sorry, guys, but oof.
Well, I guess it's going to be the canary in the coal mine then. But get ready to see a absolute shitload of cases where students are falsely accused, they get railroaded, they get kicked out of school, the university keeps their money, and then they have to sue because they have faced gender discrimination. I don't know if you have the same protections in Canada as you do in the United States. If I understand things correctly, you can be discriminated against if you're not part of a protected group, and nobody cares statewide or state-wise. Whereas in the United States, it has to go both ways. So if a guy can prove that he was mistreated because he was a guy, or that his right to due process was violated because he was a guy, he has a case. I don't know if that's the same in Canada or not. I don't know.
I am not as well versed in that, but I know that Quebec does a lot of things kind of differently than the rest of the country. So I kind of hope that that's just going to stay over there. We'll see. That they can use it as their trial setting for the rest of the country. But with Trudeau still in, I'm not going to hold my breath. So we'll see.
Then I would suggest the rest of Canada keep an eye and watch what happens with this, so that if similar bills, and they probably will, crop up across the country, you can use examples of what it has done in Quebec as and what it's done in the United States as your arguments against it. I would also point out, and I guess that makes it sound like San Francisco in the United States, they kind of do their own thing too. But yeah, as far as guys are concerned, if they're looking at university and that is going on there, obviously I would look at different universities in different places. I'd also consider the possibility of carrying a recording device. The always be recording rule.
Yes.
Would consider the possibility of trade school. As far as getting a degree is concerned, you really want to look at what you're getting out of it. It's not so much the college experience, because feminists have kind of killed the college experience, and snowflakes have kind of killed the college experience. It's not the bastion of intellectual discourse that it used to be.
Nope.
So my recommendation would be, if you're going to go study on a campus, make sure that you pick a major that is going to get you a lucrative job when you get done. Look at the job market. Don't just, pick something that you like. And guys are usually more likely to be better about that anyway, because they know they're going to have to support themselves when they get out of college, and probably a family too. But the other thing is, look at online. If you have the discipline to do to deal with an online university, or to take online classes from a local university, incorporate that into your studies. It's cheaper, and you're at less risk, and you don't have to deal with the static from all of the politics on campus. And,
oh God, it's so much better.
Frankly, at this point, I would highly suggest any men in particular to actively avoid physical campuses because of Title IX, at least in the United States. I can't speak outside of it. But as a instructor and as someone very familiar with academia, avoid it. We can't help you. Like, even someone like myself who's red-pilled, I can't help you. I can't. There's nothing I can do to help you. There's nothing anyone can really do in the university environment. If you come to me and say, it doesn't matter, anything, there's nothing I can do. It's always going to default to the woman in any kind of situation. And I don't blame young men in particular for wanting to avoid women. You should, frankly, particularly in university environments, because the university will always default towards the woman. no matter what the evidence is, that she could have raped you very directly, and it would default towards her. That's how messed up of a situation we are in right now. And she could have raped you and gotten pregnant, and then she gets to charge you, and you have to pay her for that. Yeah. So yeah, it's messed up. Avoid it.
Well, and the other thing is, I know that Canada has a different slander law set up than the United States. I know this from shit, I just lost my friend's name in my head. That's terrible. He gets called Danny Boy, and I can't think of his last name. That's awful. Dan Perrins did a walk for suicide awareness and for awareness of men's rights activists getting slandered. And he actually was wanting to see Canada's slander law enforced. And apparently it's actually a criminal offense to slander someone to a certain degree. If you defame someone in certain ways, it is a criminal offense. And I think among the ways that are included in that is falsely accusing someone of a crime. So if that happens, if that's starting to happen more and more, then maybe it's time for men to start pushing for prosecution under that law as well. Fight back.
I think it's gonna be it's gonna be so much pushback from feminists, because they're going to say it's not, you know this obviously, it's going to be, it was a emotional crime.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to get men and women pushing against this. And it's just going to have to be more than just the small handful of people. Like Aiden was saying, like any one professor can't stand up to like the dean, all of the major higher ups at any given university. And it is a good idea to go offline, not only for like your own personal safety, but because, or to online universities, because you can work at the same time, hopefully at a non-feminist position there. So you don't also have to worry about HR at the same time. You can earn money while you're doing it. It is cheaper, and you don't have to deal with the kind of bullshit that's happening on university campuses these days.
You know, this is basically the kind of thing that's going to happen in order to create a wake-up call for universities. University administrators will notice if their enrollment is down and they are not, basically they're not getting the profits that they want.
Mizzou.
They're going to notice. They're going to notice if the only money that they're getting is their government support, because they're going to end up at some point. They'll end up on a level where they can't pay their bills without asking for more money from the government. And if their enrollment is down that far and they go to the government for money, the government's going to ask them, why should we fund you if you're not teaching students?
Are we going to take bets on whether they're going to figure it out? Or
it's the U.S.
It may take a whole generation doing this. It may take 10 years. It may take 20 years. But this is already happening in the United States. There are smaller universities some smaller universities are closing, going out of business because enrollment is down.
Particularly, and they should be. Oberlin, for example, is so fucked. I remember I was an undergrad, and I went to an undergrad about within a quick drive from Oberlin. If you don't know anybody in the chat, Oberlin is essentially the East Coast equivalent of, oh shoot, what's that really stupid college in Washington State? It's extremely liberal. We were sent there to look at how, isn't it so exciting? Like, look at how green and eco-friendly they are. Their enrollment is down, and I mentioned Mizzou, but like the university in general is not addressing the fact that their enrollment is in the toilet. They've had to, I think, even shut down an entire block of their housing.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked up. And
yeah,
and the state shouldn't be paying for this sort of thing. Why in God's name would you want to use tax dollars to pay for a brainwashing program against the country? Like, that, it just doesn't make sense. Why are more people not standing up against this shit? This is fucked up.
Get up to it. You get in big trouble, dude. You're a fucking Nazi, essentially, right? I mean, that is it's astounding to me that this word Nazi is being thrown away around the way it is, because it's so dangerous. That it's so dangerous.
Yes, they have decided that free speech is not the problem.
God damn it.
You guys know I had to do that. But yeah, this situation, just like any of the situations that we're talking about, part of the solution is going to be look at what is funding the status quo. What's paying for this situation to stay the way that it is right now? And with colleges, I mean, the thing that's paying colleges to stay this way is the fact that students will routinely take out loans and put themselves in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that is unerasable, right? And get a degree that doesn't get them a job. And the thing that has to change for that, if you got kids going into university, give them a very serious talk about this. If you're of an age to be going into university, consider this very carefully. If you're going into debt for something, you're making an investment. You have the right to expect that will pay off. And if your university's not serving you in terms of giving you a rundown of the job market, making sure that you know how easily or how difficult it's going to be for you to pay off those loans when you get out, it's going to be on you to get that information yourself. This is something that you just can't get around. And if universities have to deal with students demanding a realistic and beneficial outcome for themselves when they get out of college and refusing to just pay for a piece of paper that gives them nothing but status, then they will have to change. Eventually, they will have to change.
There is no status left. There is no status left.
I can agree with that too.
Yeah, we were told, I think, in our sort of general generational period that, and it continues on to the millennials, that university was necessary, and then it turns out there weren't enough jobs. There just weren't enough. There weren't enough jobs to go around for people, not for people with philosophy degrees and women's studies degrees. So you're wasting your money and your time, and you're completely correct, Hannah. Do not end up $80,000 in debt for something you cannot find a job for.
It's happening with a lot of areas. If you're a guy and you're going into massage therapy, research your local job market before you take out any loans. If you're going into physical therapy, if you're going into any area of the arts, any area of entertainment, any area of design, look into the local job market. Find out if you're going to have to move for a job, because your university will tell you, oh yeah, with this degree you can work anywhere. Everybody likes massage therapists. Everybody likes physical therapists. There's worker comp, covered physical therapy clinics everywhere. There's not. Sorry. Yeah. And the thing is, the local job market and the national job market might be very different from each other as well. So, again, this is accountability in and of itself, because it's you being responsible for yourself and you being responsible for your own outcomes. But at the same time, it's holding the university accountable for the environment that it has for you and for the outcome that you're going to get for the money that you invest in university. But we're going to move on from this topic, and we're going to go on to another. We've got a couple more actually several more super chats. We have Base Trap Kayla gave us $5 and said the dangers of the imaginary patriarchy are leading to radical feminists setting up a very real matriarchy. Fourth wave, welcome to the matriarchy. And I'm seeing that as well. We're getting to the point now where it's almost like all a chick has to do is point the finger and go "Ah!" like in Body Snatchers, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and the crowd converges on the poor guy, and he's taken over. And it is very much a feminist setup matriarchy, because it's basically set up in a situation where there's not only a complete lack of accountability for women and girls, but there's an unmitigated degree of privileges that are labeled rights.
Yeah, well, I mean, and even then, like, even people who were, you're not even allowed to make a teenage mistake anymore. Like even things from that far back are now being used to get people out of their jobs entirely, like ruin careers. And it's ridiculous. Like there was that one picture of that guy holding his hands over that woman's chest and not even touching her. I'm pretty sure that some of my friends have taken more risque photos than that. It's terrifying to think that something that lighthearted, that minuscule can entirely ruin your career. It's ridiculous. It shouldn't be allowed.
My only take on that is he is of the side that set that standard. I think he might have figured out that the standard was wrong because of his experiences. My ability to feel sorry for him for being held to it is limited by my realization that he's part of the problem. That this standard wouldn't exist if it wasn't being pushed by the regressive left and the over traditionalistic, where they're going beyond tradition and into, you know, the imaginary traditions of chivalry and so on, right? And I just I feel sorry for him. And I think part of his, somebody nailed it on one of the news channels the other night. They said, you know, I think he might actually be, because he seemed bewildered when he talked about it. He might actually be a little autistic. And the way he talks, it sounds like he might actually be. But regardless, this is an unfair situation in terms of just that particular incident. I know other incidents have been described with him that are less innocent, but I don't know if any physical proof like that picture has come out. So it's a crapshoot. It's possible that he's good enough, he's smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like him. And it's possible that he really is the asshole that these women are portraying him as. But either way, all that stuff is old, and it is dumb for it to be coming out now.
Well, I mean, Christ, we keep going down the path that we're going, and pretty soon we're going to have the Junior Anti-Sex League policing men and women not being too close to each other.
That's where we're headed. It's
the climax police.
Yes.
It's unfucking believable. It's, you know, I have issues with the concept of horseshoe theory. I don't think it's accurate. But in terms of this sexual revolution thing, we really are going into a horseshoe, in that we go so far down the rabbit hole of the sexual revolution of women, the sexual liberation of women, until women need to be protected by what? Burqas? What do we... Seriously, I don't know what they want at this point. I'm not... Okay, so we've given women the entire control over sex, because if you impregnate a woman, as we have discussed here, game over, man. Game over. She has total control over your ass. Not only just your ass, but your progeny, your child, who is half you. And yet at the same time, with this sexual assault kind of stuff, women essentially, like... We both have all the control over how we respond to sexuality, but how dare you look at a woman? Because that's rape, right? This is such a bizarre kind of conundrum, and I don't even know what the word would be. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Discombobulating, isn't it?
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like.
It just takes the words right out of you.
You end up like a confused cat at this point. It's how do we get here, right? How do we get here? Well, we got here because people figured out that demonizing men and using women as proxy victims was very lucrative. There's a lot of money in it. If you look up the amount of grants that go to organizations for the protection of women's sexuality. I wouldn't Google search it exactly that way, but check out just various terms related to that. Terms related to motherhood, single motherhood, terms related to college co-eds, women on campus, terms related to battered women's shelters, terms related to abortion services, terms related to charity services for mothers, and so on, you'll find there's a huge amount of money in female victimhood, and in portraying women as victims of their own choices and blaming men as perpetrators of the victimhood of women's own choices. So, I mean, that's basically
It's
why
even
this
worse
has
than that.
happened.
It's even worse than that. It's even like I mean, now that's terrible. That well, obviously, women can't be responsible because this is what we were talking about, Prem, which is the women as children thing. But we're all very well aware of, for example, the difference between, let's say, Breast Cancer Awareness Month versus, is there a Testicular Cancer Awareness Month?
Yeah.
Are there any things like this? No, not
No
really.
Shave Movember, but
Yeah.
actually feminists have criticized No Shave Movember as if it takes away from female cancer awareness.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm so
like-
shocked.
Yeah, more men die from testicular and prostate cancers than women die from breast cancer, because there have been such great advances in breast cancer research, and that's good that it's not good that more men are dying, but it's good that the deaths that are associated with breast cancer have reduced that much. That's a great thing, and it should be celebrated.
Absolutely, yes,
But-
it should.
Oh, definitely.
But the idea that pointing that out and saying, all right, now we need to do the same thing with these cancers, it makes it a competition, is just absolutely insane. Like, we're on a roll with breast cancer. Things are getting better, and there is continued research and there's continued funding. That's great. It helps both sexes. 1 out of 6 breast cancer patients are men.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the same thing needs to happen for other cancers. The same thing needs to happen for brain cancer. The same thing needs to happen for colon cancer.
We also haven't reduced
personally, I'm more likely to get colon cancer than breast cancer because of my family history. Should I ignore colon cancer because it's not a female cancer?
Well, I think that's the whole thing too, is that we don't even, you're correct, 1 in 6 men get breast cancer, and there's still a stigma there that if you're a man, you get breast cancer, there's a problem with that, or you're sort of outside of the norm. But I mean, this is a complete tangent on all of this. But I think that on some level, as has been discussed many times on this channel and, in everything you guys talk about, is that it is such a focus on women. Even like the men who get breast cancer, are they involved in these breast cancer pink marches? No, I mean, they might be, but like, are they considered? Does anybody give a shit about? Do you think that like the vast majority of people who go out there and buy pink products during Breast Cancer Awareness Month, that they give a shit about men? No, they're thinking about women. And we've talked about this many times, that there is this preoccupation with women, and it's partially evolutionary, and that the human race, as any species probably does, has a little bit of a proclivity to focus upon women because we are the bearer of children. But we have fucked up so badly by going on and making women the focus of everything. This is where all this comes from. It doesn't come out of, I think, a bad place, though, is what I believe the emphasis need be. This doesn't come out of a bad place, even from the women who are benefiting out of it. Men and women who focus on women's rights, or what they think are women's rights. Also, obviously, there's a lot of disparity there. They're doing it really out of an evolutionary reason. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I mean, evolutionary psychology kind of talks about that. We are the bottleneck for production, so that are treated as, I guess, more evolutionally important, because one man can impregnate several different women, but when a woman gets pregnant, they're stuck pregnant for 9 months, and they can only get pregnant with one child. So I understand the biological reasons why. That doesn't mean, I mean, like, we're an intelligent species. We should work to fight against that, and we don't have to focus on the reproduction anymore as much as, say, other animals that really don't focus on anything else. We can focus on, we can focus on the fact that men are human beings and they deserve like equal respect, equal caring as women do.
I think that's a very good way to explain it. We've had sort of our social experiment for a century, maybe 2 centuries, of focusing on one gender's rights, and it has been catastrophic. It has been absolutely catastrophic. And what we should take away from that, what we should learn from that is, like, we do have an understanding of human rights. We have an understanding of basically the right to not be interfered with unless you're interfering with someone else in an unjust way. And that's basically what all human rights kind of trace back to. And if we're going to protect that, if we're going to protect things like bodily autonomy with laws, we're going to protect things like property rights and so on with laws, and we're going to hold people accountable for their trespasses against other people with laws, all of those things should apply equally, regardless of your sex, regardless of your race, regardless of your background, regardless of your marital status, regardless of your religious beliefs. None of that stuff should change whether or not something is human right, whether or not you are accountable for behavior that infringes on it, whether or not as an adult you have a certain responsibility toward the society you live in. None of that should change those things. And in order to do that, you know, in the long run, we're going to have to stop focusing on gender-related discussions. It's going to have to be about rights, not about superficial demographic considerations. And we'll get to that point, but it's going to be a hard fight because we are in that situation where we're sort of becoming self-aware as a species in terms of our instincts have done these things to us, and following our instincts has led us to this place, and now we have to be aware of the functional versus dysfunctional manifestations of those instincts and sort it out and consciously choose to only allow functional manifestations. I'm going to go through a couple more super chats. We have Christian Rodriguez give us $5 and says, I enjoy what you ladies are doing. I hope you keep on the fight for equal rights. And I think we're all enthusiastic enough that all of us are, and riled up enough that all of us are in this for the long haul. I mean, I'm going to have my fists up until this is done and there isn't anything to fight for anymore. And Joey Jojo gives us $5 and says, I don't look at, talk to, or walk near women. I only talk to women if they speak to me first. I try everything not to be accused. And this is happening more and more, I will say, with people. I've noticed that it's not just the men going their own way phenomenon. There's also like the Japanese grass-eating men phenomenon, which is similar but not the same, as there's some differences there. And shoot, I can't think of what it's called, but there's
Hikikomori.
The younger generation that is not moving out of their parents' houses, and they don't go get jobs, and they don't go to university. It's
Hikikomori.
And that's happening as well. And I'm seeing some aspects of that here in the United States where people are withdrawing socially because of the environment that they're dealing with. And it doesn't necessarily fully protect you. You have to be ready to fight back, and you have to be ready to defend yourself, because there are situations where women have picked people off of Facebook and claimed that that was the father of their child. And if the guy doesn't get the notification because the state sent it to his previous residence, he's on the hook if he's in California or some other states. There's been situations where women have picked men off of social media and said, that guy kidnapped me and raped me, and I escaped. And the guy has gone through a horrible ordeal. There are situations where girls have claimed things happened to them that because like they've been very vague and given vague descriptions of who they say did it and so on, that basically put guys through ordeals of being investigated for crimes because they vaguely meet the vague description. And then the girls have had to come out and say, well, no, I made it up, and they didn't name the guy, so we didn't have any recourse against them. These are things that happen. You can't withdraw from society entirely in the hopes that it'll prevent you from dealing with this stuff. You have to be always be recording, when you're dealing with females. Have to be able to document if you have somebody that you're worried about, accusing you. The guy that I saw through the vexatious litigant situation here in the Dayton area, the 7-year ordeal, the thing that saved his butt over and over again was that his whereabouts and his activities were fully documented. He was able to go into court anytime and prove at any time of any day what he was doing and where he was and who he was with. And that prevented his ex from being able to say that he was somewhere else, doing something else to her. And it's a rotten situation, but that's the first thing that needs to happen. And the second thing that needs to happen is when these incidents continue to happen where some chick lies and gets proved to have lied in court, there needs to be a social push. Men and women need to push for this, that there has to be accountability. She can't be exempt from prosecution for crimes like filing a false police report, lying to a police officer during an investigation, committing perjury in a court of law, filing false paperwork in court, frivolous protection order abuse. These things, you can get prosecuted for doing these things under any other circumstance. You should be able to get prosecuted for doing these things under the circumstance wherein you're lying about being beaten or raped. That's just the bottom line. And once we push for that, and once we get to a point where there isn't an exemption, there isn't a pussy pass for lying to the state and wasting the state's resources and putting some guy through hell, that's what will make it safer for you, Joey Jojo. That's when you'll be able to know you're not as likely to get falsely accused. Because if you can prove she lied, she's in deep shit. The last one I have here, I think I missed one. The last one I have here is Frenchinator 2. Frenchinator 2 says, yeah, at VCU I just read the student conduct and I concluded not dating women on the campus. I conclude not dating women on the campus. There was chalk saying domestic violence is violence against women. Facepalm. And that's the situation. What happens to women matters on campus, and what happens to men gets ignored.
Yep.
Well, if you talk about helping men, that's clearly sexist, as we all know.
Well, I mean, gosh, we've just got to shut down all of the things for men, because that'll clearly help people to not commit suicide. Oh, no.
Oopsie. I think part of the problem is, though, is that we should have started out with this, but this is super messed up because this doesn't just hurt men, right? This hurts men and women equally. Women just, they don't appear to be aware of how it hurts them, at least not yet. They will be. They will be. It's why, again, they hate the sex bots, the feminists, I should say.
Yes.
They will realize how this will hurt them. It's happening already. Yeah. But this is not good for anyone involved in the system.
Well, no. And I mean, like, there are the particularly aware women who are speaking out against it, but there are still a lot of, I guess we could call them normies, who are completely unaware of what's going on. and more are just starting to be like, where have all the good men gone? And I don't think that a lot of them can remain oblivious for too long. People are going to start having to speak out about this more and more and challenge this bullshit.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult to ignore it, I think, very soon, because what are you going to do? The fact of the matter is that, well, you have used your pussies in order to control men. You have said, here is my puss. This allows me to control your life completely by controlling your ability to reproduce. And what we find in response is men said, nope, guess what? Nope, won't do it. I don't want anything to do with you. I'm going to go my own way, for example. Again, we've talked about how the MGTOW sort of thing is very disparate. There's all sorts of people involved in it for all different kinds of reasons. Why? But look at women. Look at how fucking the average woman is furious at the concept of MGTOW, at how it's how disgusting, how awful that men just say, hey, I would really prefer if I didn't get dicked over by the law in this case. I think that's going to gain momentum, and it's not, as we know, it's bad for men and for women, and it's going to start reaching the mainstream. I don't think there's any question about that.
No, it's definitely started reaching the mainstream, and it's funny because you get people now, like I've seen this on social media and I've seen it in person, that are really aware of the issues, and they'll say the same types of things that we have pointed out. A lot of times they'll say them in a more moderate sounding way. They haven't been doing this for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. There's men's rights activists that have been doing this for 30 or more years. And you get very frustrated, and some of us become caustic and short-spoken sometimes when we have to deal with idiots. By the way, don't call anybody an idiot on Twitter, especially not if they call you a bitch and a cunt, because you're not allowed to respond to that if the person calls you that and you're a men's rights activist. You get put in Twitter jail for 12 hours. No, that just happened to me this week. I got put in Twitter jail for 12 hours for responding to a person that called me a bitch and a cunt by calling her an idiot. But anyway,
well, only one of those terms is actually offensive. Idiots, clearly worse.
Clearly the worst. But yeah, I've noticed that there is an awareness that people are getting fucked over, and that it's almost entirely men. I've noticed that there is an awareness that fathers are being separated from their families, from their children. I've noticed that there is an awareness that the burden of supporting our society as a whole is, and by whole I mean money pit, is falling on men, because more and more women are opting to be non-working single custodial mothers every year, every generation, and so people are starting to wake up to this, and they're starting to get antsy about it. They're seeing it happen to the men in their own lives, and they're upset about that, and they're starting to become more receptive to the idea that there needs to be legal reform, which is a great thing. The more we can get normies to understand that a large part of the problem is that the law facilitates and even directs the discrimination that men are facing, and that discrimination hurts everybody, the more likely we are to actually get that reform through. More likely, especially, that we are to see fathers' rights protected. And if we start seeing fathers' rights protected, and fathers are able to raise their children to be more accountable people, we will start seeing a generational change over the course of, the next 20 years or 30 years with other laws as well.
Oh, I sure hope so.
Same. Yeah, I think that, though, it is going to happen where some women, not all, some women, they are seeing it now, but I don't think there's obviously a minority, of which we are in, but it needs to expand. And there is a large there is a large portion of women, I'm not going to say majority, but there's a large portion of women who are starting to see, wow, I can't get a husband. I can't get a boyfriend to seriously engage with me. And they're seeing this now, and that's why we're seeing these women who are 30, 35 and can't find a man to lock down. Now they could go to a sperm bank, but they can't find a man to lock down, and then they kill themselves. Well, why do you think that is? You created a system. I mean, not you personally. I feel bad. I feel terrible for these women in some way, but like your feminist system created this, where I don't blame any man for avoiding women like the plague at this point.
Yeah, you start lumping on enough risks, and eventually everybody's going to be like, no, this is a losing strategy now. I don't know what they thought was going to happen. Like, this should have just been obvious. This was obvious 5 years ago, and it's just been getting worse ever since then.
And Frank Bullet pointed this out as well in the chat, which is that we even have women who will sue men for child support who are sperm donors.
Yeah.
Well, so this is completely screwed.
The one news story that I know of on that actually was the state going after a man who did not go through a sperm donor, sperm bank. It was a lesbian couple wanted to have a baby, and they couldn't go through a sperm bank for that. So they had a friend or a guy that they knew and trusted, basically. Fill in.
I heard this. Yes.
Jesus Christ. No good deed goes unpunished.
They divorced, or separated or whatever, and the one that had custody of the child went on welfare, and then the state went after the father, the biological father, even though he had no involvement in the child's life. So it was a situation where they weren't in a good legal situation for that. I'm not so sure the state would go after someone from a sperm bank, because a lot of times that's protected information. So they'd actually have to go. They'd actually have to go through the process of making that not private information before they could even. The mother doesn't know who the father is in that situation, and the child might not even be able to find out who the father is in that situation.
Am I wrong on that, though? That in some instances, though, you do get to kind of pick, but you only know the basic information,
right?
And thereby, but then they can kind of find out some things over time. And I don't know how bad that's gotten. So this is actually you actually brought up the actual situation I was thinking of, which was the lesbian couple. However, isn't that at risk right now? That even being a sperm donor could potentially land you. I mean, well, we know, as you all know, that a child, a boy who was raped by a teacher, was, made responsible for his own rape that produced a child.
Actually, there's been numerous circumstances, and I have seen one story where the father was as young as 11 years old. I can't find it anymore.
Jesus Christ.
I can't find that one anymore. If I remember right, it was an 11-year-old and an older teenager who was babysitting and took advantage of the kid that she was babysitting. But there are several stories out there of 13-year-old boys who have become fathers and at some point had child support assessed against them, child support obligations assessed against them that include all the way back to birth, meaning that at 13 or 14 years old, when they're legally they don't have the right to get a job, right? They can get maybe a paper route, but they can't get a real job. What are they going to do? Take the guy's paper route money for child support? And the state is a lot of times the entity responsible for going after them, because the mother gets custody after getting out of jail, and because she was convicted of a sex crime, she can't get a job, and so she goes on welfare. And my thinking is the solution to that is if you are convicted of as an adult creating a pregnancy with someone who's too young to get a job, then and you're convicted of doing that, you shouldn't be able to have custody.
Yeah, well, yeah, no kidding. Yeah. That should be a no-brainer. This child would be better off with foster parents than with this crazy. Yeah. Not even go down that road. It's just
I'm not going to go down the whole road of age of consent laws. I will say that I do agree with the Romeo and Juliet standard,
No.
but you know, and it seems unreasonable to me when you see an 18-year-old getting convicted of you know, having sex with their 17-year-old significant other because their birthday has passed and now they're 18 and all of a sudden it's illegal, when they were doing it last week and they were both
Sure,
17 and
absolutely.
it's not.
Yeah, of course.
But 11 years old, 13 years old, and an adult, I'm sorry, but if you don't know better than that, there's something significantly wrong with you and you do belong in jail. And I don't care whether you're 18 or 80, it's the same.
We find this all the time, though, as well. This is a whole nother issue that's, yeah, again, we don't really need to start getting into because it's an entirely different issue outside of the one that we're discussing.
Right.
Women don't go to jail when they molest children very often, or at least not for a long period of time now, do they? But this is all of the same problem, in that women are given a sort of...
free pass?
Yes, a free pass. We're given a higher status in civilization and society that is silly, and has clearly wound it up in the issue and the series of issues that we're now dealing with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's just a woman, right? Like,
we're just a little babby.
Yeah,
we can't.
She's not responsible.
No. There's even been people arguing. I've even seen arguments that the boy seduced the adult. Like, you have to be kidding me.
That's so disgusting.
You know,
11-year-olds.
Yeah. 13-year-olds, 11-year-olds are not seductive. They're goofy kids, okay?
That kid's got game.
No, you know, this is definitely not, you know, but in any case,
it's fucking disturbing. Have you ever met an 11-year-old?
I raised one.
Well, I know, but I mean, like, it was sort of redundant or you know, a generalized question. Like, have you ever been around an 11-year-old? They're not particularly sexual.
No. They're kids, and
girls still have cooties at that age.
Yeah, gross.
Well, hell, I remember my son and his friends, my middle kid, my younger stepdaughter, got a phone that she could put apps on for the first time, you know, when they were younger. And I think these boys were about 11 years old, and this they had this thing on there called Talking Carl. And anything that you said to it, it would say back in a ridiculous cartoony voice. And of course, they ended up creating a story of Spider-Man ending up dying a slimy, boogery death. And I was like, this is the epitome of 11-year-old boyness, okay? It was great. It was great to sit and listen to and a lot of fun, but I just cannot imagine anybody.
But that's adorable. Like, that's
thinking that
it's so different.
Yes. We can say this age group that would condemn Spider-Man to slimy, stinky, boogery death is more accountable under the law and in the eyes of society than a 30-year-old woman with a degree who is certified to teach them.
And yet they're still pushing down this road, and they're thinking that this is clearly going to end well for
really
women,
gross.
right?
Yeah, this is really gross, really disgusting, and I also don't understand the fucking point of it. I mean, I understand the point. The point is to make women rulers. It's to make us so that we're unquestionably the rulers of society. And it was right. I don't remember who said it now in the super chat. This is a matriarchy that they are quickly headed toward. That we are quickly headed toward. Women can't be questioned. Women can rape 11-year-old boys. I'm sorry, that's rape without question. That is absolutely rape. And now it's like, oh, well, he is a man, patriarchy, thereby he seduced her. Are you serious? But we're seriously having these kinds of arguments right now. This is disturbing on levels that are upsetting, you know? I mean, there's many things that are upsetting about this, but to say this,
it gives you the willies, doesn't it?
Children. Oh, it is. It does, because it means that there's nothing. There is nothing left. What is left that women cannot control in the society right now? What is left? What don't we control?
You know, honestly, I'm pretty sure we're to a point where we have everything. There isn't really. I don't know. Well, we don't control fully the military, thank God, yet. And I hopefully with the dysfunction that has happened with the sexual violence issues in the military and the fraternization issues, hopefully that is enough of a wake-up call to military leadership that they will not let women have control of the military. And this is something that there's that stupid common belief that if women ran things, the world would be more peaceful. Look back in history. Women who run nations are bigger warmongers than men who run
Look
nations.
at Queen Victoria.
Yeah,
Huh? How about that?
because they don't have to. They never had to go into war with the troops. They weren't like kings that would ride into battle with their troops. They sat in their castles on their cushy little chair and sent the men. So they didn't have to risk anything. And because they were queen and they were beloved and so on, they didn't even face the same criticism for it. So yeah, don't think for a minute that if women ran the world, we might be dealing with a war every time PMS clashes with PMS.
Oh
You
my
know,
God.
it just you never know. But
Yeah,
I'm gonna
and
read a couple more super
okay.
chats because we're getting close to where it's gonna
Coming
be
up on
time
the
to
end.
end the show. So and this is a really good point. Frenchinator 2 gave us $5 and says, "Where have all the good men gone? The good men are there, but you don't want them." And that's another point. And this is another accountability issue that goes straight to the problem of why are there so many single moms? It's because one of the aspects that women have complete control over in terms of reproduction is whether or not the mother chooses to reproduce with a reliable partner. And there is no accountability for a woman who chooses to reproduce with a partner that she can already tell is not reliable. He's just a lot of fun. And that's women seem to have, especially younger girls, the guy that is a little crazy, the guy that is bigger and stronger, the guy that is a little more aggressive, the guy that they think is the alpha, but he might really just be a train wreck, the male version of a train wreck. And it's being attracted to train wrecks. It's not necessarily unnatural or abnormal, but choosing to reproduce with a train wreck, there's got to be some accountability for that. Men who
Oh
choose to
yeah.
reproduce with train wrecks end up in deep shit.
Well,
Girls who
plus,
choose to
like,
reproduce with train wrecks ought to at least be treated like they made a bad decision, and they need to
oh
do some
yeah.
work to deal with that.
Well, and you've got like examples of women wanting to stay with these bad boy types and have babies with them, and if they can't convince him to commit or to have the children willingly, then they'll trick him, and then they'll act all surprised when all of a sudden he decides to disappear. It's
Oof, where there's so much research on that, on dominance theory. Oh my God, there's so much. I don't even know where to start. But continue
well,
with the
there's a
super chats.
whole
Yeah, it's a
there's
whole. This is the whole thing. That is its entire conversation. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, that we're probably not going to get into that.
Yeah.
Upcoming. I mean, when I talked about doing the accountability series, there's a few different topics that I want to visit. I want to do one on the differences in accountability in terms of criminal court, the differences in accountability in terms of what constitutes sexual violence and partner violence. The difference in accountability in self-support. We did talk about the supposed wage gap, and sort of the supposed pink tax goes into that as well. But I think we've kind of talked tonight. We've kind of talked this topic to death. I've got one more super chat that I'm going to read though. Panic by Numbers gave us $5 and said, I really appreciate HBR for the broadcasts. You're intelligent and overall awesome. P.S. I'm waiting for an adjustable personality Emma Watson sex bot. And first of all,
adjustable personality is
Yeah.
very important.
well, first of all, thank you very much for the compliment. Second,
Yeah.
Emma Watson is a kid. She is an adjustable personality individual. When I was her age, I was awful. I will just say that now. Like, people that knew me when I was in my 20s, especially my early 20s, could come out and shock the shit out of you guys with regard to my behavior back then, because I was, in all senses of the word except chronological and physical, a child. I didn't have to be responsible for myself, and I went through a period of just being a dumbass. I had my head far enough up my ass that I could see my own tonsils. So I look at Emma Watson. She's gone to university. She's been in the academic environment. She's been encapsulated in the Hollywood environment. She's had been heavily influenced by, God, I can't think of the author's name now. That's awful. Yeah, I'm dealing with being short on sleep tonight. But yeah, J.K. Rowling. She's been, had the influence of J.K. Rowling. She may grow up. It's possible for her to grow up. She's still got plenty of time to do that. And if she ever becomes a mom, that might change her entirely.
Oh, it might really. It's almost like that changes a lot of women.
Yeah, you do a lot of times as a girl, you discover that you're going to be responsible for an entire person.
Well, especially if they have
helpless.
a son.
Yeah.
Then they can usually get a little bit more empathy after that.
Well, and I think you get a dose of testosterone when you carry a son, because things changed for me that indicated a dose of testosterone. We'll just say that. In any case, so she may be an adjustable personality individual already. So don't give up hope. Just don't hold your breath on that. But aside from that, I would like to, I think, say we're going to end the show. I think we're pretty much done for the night. So I'm going to end with my usual shill. Here at Honey Badger Radio, we've been labeled guilty of wrongthink, and as such, we're on the wrong side of YouTube. If you don't want to wake up one morning and find yourself unable to find our content because our channels have been incarcerated, go to badgerfeed.com. We've moved to a digest format for podcasting, so if you're listening to this in an audio format and you want to be able to continue to follow our uncut live streams, you will also find those at badgerfeed.com. So just go to badgerfeed.com, man. It's where the cool kids are. And to all the cool kids listening tonight, to my co-hosts, and to everyone who helps make Honey Badger live streams happen, thank you and good night.